Everybody, welcome back to the Unraveler Show with my great friend William the Butcher, who this week has upgraded his name to Scary Garcia. I feel like there's a theme going on here, man. I feel like as we're progressing to the end, you're coming up with names that are gonna just like you're gonna end me here pretty soon. Yeah, bro, you're gonna have to be easy on me tonight, man. I damaged my rib. I'm not sure if it bruised or broken. But my dog took me down at the park the other day because now we got two dogs. We just got a new dog, and I swear they're in cahoots now. And they're like, let's get this guy. And one of them got around my legs, the other one pulled me down because she chased after another dog. And man, so I'm in severe pain. So don't jab me too hard, bro. You might take me down.
Take advantage of the.
Yeah, take advantage of this while you can. But anyway, so tonight, William, we are visiting the question: does religious diversity disprove God, or is there evidence for God? Really, that's the title of two different chapters in your book, but I kind of merged them because last week we didn't quite maybe get to the evidence for God. Maybe we did. Maybe there's more you wanted to say about that. So it's kind of a merger of the two chapters, but ultimately the goal is to get to the whole question about religious diversity being a disproof of God's existence. I don't know that chapter is going to take us that long, so we might end up focusing more on the chapter we were supposed to focus on last week, but it's okay because just talking and going wherever the conversation leads is good, and it's beneficial, and I think it's healthy for us to dialogue about. So I've been enjoying this, particularly because you've thrown me for a loop. Like I honestly didn't expect to go down the path I did with you because you're not what I would consider a typical Christian. And by that, I don't even mean the spectrum of Christians in the grace through faith Christianity that I only knew, because I thought that was Christianity. Of course, there's the Catholic version and what I thought I understood of the what's your
Orthodox.
Orthodox, yeah, thank you.
Yes.
I keep wanting to say Episcopalian. But I would assume Episcopalian is a version of Orthodox, isn't it?
No, it's it's Anglican.
And that's Anglican, okay. But Anglicans are also Orthodox, isn't it? Isn't that considered part of that?
Well, I mean, they're not. I mean, they would consider themselves Orthodox, and
okay. Well, and so would our Christian version. So okay. So I mean, when I say that there are 45,000 different versions of Christianity in the world in my book, I'm kind of not even making that up. It's just every person I bring on my show has a different version of Christianity, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to even know what to expect, because basically everybody just, what seems to me, just makes up their own version of Christianity and what they like. Your argument, of course, would be that it's not that. It's that it's based on and rooted in a historical tradition, a rich tradition. And so, maybe we need to discuss that a little bit and talk about it. But it is definitely not a version I've really ever comprehended. I have never seen this version where I even after the end of last conversation, when we tried to kind of give a definition to your version of God, even then I couldn't seem to steelman you. I tried, really tried hard, but it just seemed all over the place, almost like trying to catch a fish, and I couldn't do it. So maybe before we go any further, if it's okay with you, just so I can understand better what your version of Christianity is, you can kind of defend it a little more, like give me a little bit more explanation of what God is, who God is, how you define it, how your religion defines it, how your religion defends itself as the true Orthodox position. There's just a lot to unpack there, and that it's a struggle for me right now because wow, you've just really brought in a whole new version of Christianity, and I'm like, okay, well, where do we go now? So, is that fair? Can I ask you to do that? Is that okay?
Sure. And I think I would start off by saying, and this is something I should say as an Orthodox Christian, that some things that I will relate are my opinion, and they're opinions I'm allowed to have as an Orthodox Christian, but they may not be absolute dogmatic teaching statements of the Orthodox faith. But I will say that nothing that I have said, and I believe I can say this fairly safely, nothing I said is in contradiction to the Orthodox faith. There may be people who are Orthodox that may disagree with me on some points, but I'm not saying anything that's contradictory. Essentially, let's see, how do we start? First of all, there's three basic ways that you could define the Christian faith, and I think I actually posted about this today. One of those is what I call the individualistic approach, and that's where the individual themselves determines what the faith is based on their best opinion and understanding of Scripture or whatever it might be. The second, and that's typically the Protestant approach. There's the second one would be the Roman Catholic approach, which I call the unilateral approach, and that's where you have the Bishop of Rome serves as the vocal dogmatic teaching voice of the church, and basically whatever he says, as long as you're not contradicting what the Bishop of Rome teaches, then as a Roman Catholic, you are in communion with their faith. The Orthodox is a third way, and that's what we call conciliarism, which is basically we believe that the tradition, the traditional views and teachings of the entire church over all of history from the beginning constitutes the framework of the faith. So that brings us to our idea of tradition, and tradition would be, to try to put it succinctly, my best argument for Orthodox tradition would be, I have in my kitchen, or I recently changed this, but I did for a long time have a towel hanging in my kitchen from Crete, and it was brought to me by a lady that I attend liturgy with, who was born and raised in Crete, and it's the same Crete that Paul wrote a letter to, I believe, Titus. The same church, same place, and it's always been there, and it's never been through a Reformation. It's never been Roman Catholic. It's always been Orthodox from the time that Paul started that church. So from tradition, we would argue that we're just what we've always been. This is just the faith that we've always had. In terms of how do we see God, how do we frame God, I think when you said it's hard for me to put my hands around it, and part of that is because Orthodox theology is based primarily and strongly on the concept of mystery, and that's that there are more things beyond our grasp, more things beyond our ability to comprehend than there are things that are. And then particularly something called apophatic theology, which means that God, if we're trying to describe God for us, almost anything that you could say about God would have problems, or would be deficient. Language would fail, human reasoning would fail. So we believe that it's easier to say things about what God isn't than it is to say about what God is. And so our general idea is more about, our theological approach is more about saying what statements about God are false, or what things about God are not true. And what's left, it's called apophatic theology again, which means unspoken. What's left is the essence of our theology. So it does sort of make it difficult. What is God? Well, we know he's not this. We know he's not this. We know it's not this. It can't be that. It can't be that. It can't be that. So what's left? Well, that whatever's left, that's sort of the unspoken essence. But then we do have dogmatic framework, dogmatic teaching, and that would be embodied in the Nicene Creed. We believe in one God, the Father, Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, all things visible and invisible. But essentially, if I could break it down, it's very difficult to take a couple thousand years worth of theology and teaching and thinking and break it down into very small bite-sized statements. But essentially, the idea is that the ineffable God, historically, at some point, was embodied in the person Jesus Christ, and that because of that, our understanding of who God is embodied in that person, in their life, their works, what they did, what they taught, and particularly we do believe in the death, burial, the resurrection of Christ, the ascension into heaven. But essentially, it's about God became man. And the idea is that the phrase is God became man so that man might become God. And the idea is that God came and took on what we are and deified it so that in our lives we can imitate that, follow that same path. And it's God's will for us to become, we would say by grace, what he is by nature. So it's about being transformed into the divine nature, living a life that's being transformed by the divine nature. So again, I realize as I say that it's very difficult for me to really succinctly and quickly outline everything about our faith, because our faith is one that you would have to learn. You have to participate in it. You have to experience it. You have to live the life of it for you really to understand exactly the fullness. Maybe it takes a whole lifetime to understand the fullness of the impact of our traditions, what it means, and what we're trying to teach. Begins with baptism, but it is a life of discipleship, of following and teaching and learning. And so, and I think, I'm trying to outline maybe things that are different. And of course, I could talk about things that are similar. We do believe that that God offers eternal life, but the purpose of humanity is to live eternally. That was what God created us for. Those kind of things that are common to Christianity. But the essence is we believe we live in a mystery, that our human experience is divine. We were created to be human beings. Human beings hold a special place in God's creation, and that the purpose of our lives and existence here is to figure out how to be the best possible human beings that we can be. And in doing that, we are participating in the divine nature. So I probably confused you more, but I tried.
I mean, you didn't confuse me more. It doesn't necessarily help much, but that's not because you were confusing. I think you were clear on how your tradition explains itself, and that's fine. I'm just not sure it helped me understand what makes your God or the God you guys believe in different than the God that I believed in as a Christian. I mean, you say that he's defined by everything you can't explain. Basically,
well, no, not. It's not that you can't explain it. It's that if I make the primary argument that God would be the source and ground of everything that exists, that everything that exists comes from God, then anything that I say as an analogy to that is less than what I'm trying to describe. And so we would have to start with the idea that everything we say about God is going to be deficient. It's not going to be clear. It's not going to be accurate. It's going to be less than what we're trying to describe.
Which makes sense because, I mean, that's the problem of trying to define something that doesn't exist. So I get that.
Well, or define something that has no analogy in existence. If what I'm describing doesn't have anything like it in existence, then there's nothing I can use in existence to accurately describe it. And so that's where you start out with that.
Right. So, I mean, but I guess my point is the definition of God then, in your view, is indistinguishable from the definition of something that doesn't exist.
Indistinguishable. The problem with that statement is everything exists. I mean, not everything exists, but there's no such thing as nothing. There's no such thing as something that doesn't exist. There are
certainly things that don't exist.
Well, anytime you name them, they do have some form of existence.
Well, only ideology, but not in reality.
But there are many things that are only ideology that are very real. For instance, I've used this an example before. The idea of nations, of law, of money. All these things are ideology. I mean, a piece of paper is not worth even the dollar it's because we have imbued it with a ideology. So to say something, when you name something, and this goes back to the work of your Greek philosophers. Anything you name something, you give it gives it some sort of being. There is a way that it has reality. And the Greek philosophers trying to categorize things in watching the cause and effect relationships, they believe that there was a prime mover and an uncaused cause. And I think that's where our theology probably starts. And that's something the Greeks did a good job of talking about, but it's not absent from the Hebrew concepts as well. And I think that's probably where the problem is. I think a lot of times people in North America, in Christians in North America, they have a very, and I'm not being insulting, but they have a very naive Sunday school way of approaching this subject. And traditionally, and I'm talking about thousands of years of writing and thinking and living, and that was not the case. People were thinking a bit more nuanced, a little bit more sophisticated, maybe I could say, about these topics than what you get in American Western Christianity. And so I can see what could be different. But to be honest with you, Alan, that's the reason I'm Orthodox and I'm not some of these other things, because I couldn't bring myself to follow the way that they talked about God. It didn't make it. It seemed exactly like somebody made it up in a Sunday school class, or it seemed contrived, or it seemed naive, or seemed unimpressive compared to the existence of the universe itself and time. I mean, I'm not a young Earth creationist. I don't believe the Earth is only 6,000 years old. It seems to me practically, it seems very probable that it's 4.2 billion years old. I don't necessarily believe that God creating life means that poof, there was a giraffe, poof, there's a zebra. That doesn't seem to be the way things even work now.
Hey, William, before we go any further, I do have a question, but I'm not interrupting for that reason. I'm interrupting because you are breaking up a ton. Can you get out and come back in? Because we're doing that thing again.
Yeah, let me try that. Let me see.
Yeah, while William's leaving, I look to be okay, so he'll be back in just a second. Please don't take off. While you're there, hey, listen, I wrote this book called How to Kill God the Easy Way. If I can get you a clear shot of my stupid, there it is. Hey, How to Kill God the Easy Way. Encourage you to grab that. That's one of the books that William and I are countering, or he's countering in these discussions. He wrote the book called The 10 Myths of Atheism. And he thinks rebuts this book, even though he wrote it 10 years before I wrote this book. But that's what we're discussing. And so he's got 10 myths that he thinks atheists believe. And so far in our series, we have been going chapter by chapter in his book. And I've been intending to demonstrate that none of his arguments are accurate. I think I've done an effective job. He may or may not. But you have to be the judge. So that has been where we've been in this series. Today we were supposed to be on the 8th one. We're only on the 7th one because him and I got locked in on one of these weeks, and we just went to town, which was totally fun. But at any rate, William and I are decent friends. Today he's known as Scary Garcia, and he is back. So hopefully he didn't hear anything I just said, lest he send his mafia family after me. Are we good, man? You good?
We're good.
I promise I didn't say anything too bad about you while you're gone. Try to be fair and honest, but
and that's the way I like to have these kind of discussions. Is I like to be honest, and I know that I can make statements that seem to be easy wins, or at least score points for me in this whole game, and we walk away feeling like, oh, I've won this debate. But I really want to talk to you in a way that's as honest as I can be about it, and it shows you my thought process. When you disagree with someone and you see something that they don't see, or they don't see something you do see, we should stop and ask, what is it? What's the difference? What's really happening for that person? And that's what I'm trying to do. I could make, strong theological statements. I could try to corner, use debate tactics to corner you up, and catch you off guard. But to be honest with you, I don't really think that's a good way to communicate. I think it's arrogant, and maybe I catch you in this moment and you're off your game, and I make you look silly. Maybe you do that to me next time, but we really didn't communicate, and we're not being honest about the topic at that point. And that's not what I want to do. I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste my time. So I'm trying to, and that's going to make me look a little bit vulnerable. It makes me look a little bit confused at times, but I'm just trying to really give you the best answer and not be contrived, and not just say something because it sounds good and gets me out of a trap in the moment. And so I've had people say, well, you should say this. You should say, and I'm not going to do that. I'm not working that way. Really, if you follow this book, the outline of it sort of rebuts statements, but it also, for me, establishes thought processes that were important to me as I evaluated this as an option. If I were going to be an atheist, these are the problems and these are the things that I feel like that I would have with that worldview. And I know that the opening lines of these chapters typically are starting with a bad premise or a bad debate point, but it usually evolves into a more deeply thought out issue and something that needs to be considered. Last week we talked about is there evidence for God, and I think what that chapter eventually will get to is it will say that that while there may not be scientific studies or experiments that you could do that would prove the existence of God, that I believe that deductive reasoning and rational arguments consistent with a hypothesis do count as evidence. And what I would say there, and I'll do that really quickly and try to, maybe we can move on to the second point and see which one of them gives us the most fruit for this discussion. But the example I would use would be like a court of law. If I go into a court of law and the two attorneys, they both present their hypothesis, their story, the way they want things to be seen by the jury, and then both sides start offering evidence consistent with their story. I seen Joe. I'm going to contend that Joe robbed, the 7-Eleven. Well, I'm going to say it wasn't Joe. It was a guy that looked like Joe. Okay. Well, then I need to start. One attorney is going to say, well, Joe was in the area at that time. And okay, well, does that conclusively prove that he did it? No. But if he can start aligning enough evidence consistent with his theory, eventually the jury would say, your story is the one that best aligns with all the facts. And so at the end of that chapter, I'm going to say that there is evidence consistent.
William, I'm out. William, we lost you. So can you back up 30 seconds to the Joe thing? Like you're going in and out. This has been a really tough internet conversation. You're breaking up a lot.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We have bad internet connection here sometime. We got storms coming through. That may be part of it. Back to where I started, sort of. Yeah. So if I'm in a court of law,
just your conclusion. We missed a conclusion. That's all.
Sure. So basically, the idea is if you can offer facts that are consistent with a hypothesis, consistent with an assertion. And in this case, my assertion would be, I believe that God exists. And I believe that there can be facts offered that are consistent. And I personally believe that the facts are more consistent with that hypothesis than the hypothesis of cold materialism, that there is nothing willful and purposeful driving the universe. So that's kind of what that chapter, where it kind of lands at. The second chapter, the one we're talking about today, was the religious. Am I still breaking up?
A little bit, and I'm not 100% certain that it's you. I'm seeing that I'm seeing on here that the connection's unstable, so this could actually be my fault. If anybody's watching, can you throw a message in the chat to let us know if I'm also breaking up or if it's just William? Because that'll kind of give me an indication as to who to fix here. I would appreciate that. That would really help. And if you didn't hear that and I see no text come through, then I will assume it's me. All right, here we go. Well, Tim Johnson sent a question, but that has nothing to do with the question I just asked. So we'll get to him later. If anybody can help us out here to know who is the one breaking up here, I would appreciate that so I can figure out how to resolve it, because this is going to be annoying for the next 30 minutes if we don't. So give us an indication here. I just jumped in and damn hearing you. I guess that means I'm hearing you. Okay, so that must be I'm fine, I think. So let's just, Alan, I've seen no issues on either ends. Okay, thank you, Lily. Appreciate that. Well, all right. So it must somehow just be between you and me. So we'll just keep going. So before we go into any of those issues, can I let me just pause here, because I got some thoughts and questions about this whole first setup that you did. So when it comes to defining God, would you are you a proponent? Is your denomination, the Orthodox faith, Eastern Orthodox, is that a proponent of the Westminster Shorter Catechism?
No,
So, like, not at all.
no,
Okay, so you would not define God the way that the Catechism does.
no.
Okay, so me saying God is a spirit, infinite, eternal, and unchangeable, and on, that's not you guys at all.
That's not our
Okay.
statement, and I don't really know it that well to know enough to say whether I agree with it or not. The Nicene Creed would be our statement. Now, I will stand by those statements.
Just the creed, though.
The Nicene Creed and the Chalcedonian definition are two of the affirmative statements that basically that's our dogmatic theology for the Orthodox faith. Yeah.
Okay. And I apologize, y'all. I'm looking at my phone because I'm trying to check my internet status here. I'm starting to see that it could be me having an issue, and I deeply apologize. Some people are saying they're having no problem. Some people are saying they are. We'll just keep going because as this is testing, hopefully we're not having any more issues. I'm getting a full signal on my computer, so I don't know why this could be me, but we'll just keep going. All right, so we're back to the way you guys define God is if I have a way to ask, is God this? You'll say, I don't know, because we can only define God by things we can't say. I'm sorry, it just does the way it sounds to me. It's like, it's almost like if anybody asks us to give a positive definition of God, it's, well, we can't do that. All we can say is, it's not that. It's not that.
Well,
it's not that.
well,
It's not water.
Well,
It's not.
maybe I should clarify that. So, and we're talking about the term essence, and that's an important theological term. What something's made out of. Okay, so water is a hydrogen molecule and two oxygen molecules. This table in front of me is made out of oak. What is God? We can't say. We don't know what God is. We know that God exists, but we don't know that what he's made out of, if you could use that term. That's what I mean by that. And so when we're describing something classically, and we're going back, like I said, back to the Greek philosophers, which if people don't realize is they gave us the fundamental underlining of categories and ways of describing things. That's where those thoughts come from in our thought processes in English and other languages. But anyway, what is something made out of? What is God made of? We can't say. We can't define it.
So like I continue to struggle, and actually this is one crossover between Eastern Orthodox faith and any other religious faith that I've ever encountered, whether it be Christian or not. It's define God. Even in the Shorter Catechism, God is a spirit, infinite, eternal. I'm just like, stop. God is a spirit. What's a spirit? Well, it's not this, and it's not that, and it's not this, and it's not that. Okay, so give me a bunch of things that it's not, and that means it's God? Like, that's so weird. Like, that doesn't even add up to me, because if you can't define what it is, then how do you know by defining all the things it's not means you've actually landed on something? Essentially, all you've done is just explain all the things that it's not. But that doesn't mean you have anything there. You literally could explain nothing that way.
Yeah, maybe, but I use this example, I think, in the book up until maybe several years ago, decades ago, maybe less than a century. Nobody knew the infrared light existed. There was no way to read it. There was no way to measure it. There was no indication that it existed at all. But 80% of the energy that comes to the earth from the sun is infrared light. Just because somebody couldn't define it, couldn't say what it was, and some people didn't even know it existed, didn't keep it from existing, and certainly didn't keep it from having effects. So saying that I can't define what something is just being honest about not being able to define what it is. It's not saying it doesn't have existence. And if we
I'm also not saying that because you can't define it means it doesn't exist. I'm saying if you can't define it, how do you know it exists? Which brings us back to the conversation we had 2 weeks ago, I think, and maybe 4 weeks ago, whenever it was, where you admitted, well, you can't really know for certain. And
we can't define the nature of what the thing is, but I want to be clear about that, and I'll say this over and over again. We should have to agree, if unless you're going to take some strange position on the nature of the universe, something existed that caused everything to exist. Something exists that is the reason. Now, whether it's a rational or willful or mindful thing, that can be debated, and that should be discussed. But the first point is something did exist, probably it should still exist, that causes everything to exist.
I mean, okay.
So, at that point, it's not a matter of does it exist. It's a matter of how do we define.
Well, no, but that's the whole point. We don't. What I've been trying to get at is and you were so okay with this in that one show we had, and then you started to backtrack and try to say, no, that's not what you meant. And like the bottom line is, we can't know what it is. We don't know for certain. It's all up in the air. You're basically just choosing what you think.
It's not all up in the air.
When it comes to defining for certain what it is that brought all this about, yes, it is.
No. What you're confusing what I'm saying with what you thought I might have been saying. What I was saying was there's not a meter or a instrument that we have right now that can measure and give you a reading and say, okay, this is the God quotient. This is we're detecting 100% of God in this. That's not. There's nothing that I know of, and it probably never will be. But I'm just benefit that doesn't exist. And arguments for the existence of God, they're never going to lead you up and say, here's a picture I took, with my cell phone of God running through my backyard. That's proof. That's not how.
Bro, but listen, I can't do that with the Big Bang either. That doesn't prove the Big Bang exists.
Right, exactly.
Well, that's my point. I can't prove anything.
You can't, but you reasonably accept one and reject the other.
No, yes, I reasonably accept one and reject the other, but not to a degree that I'm unwilling to say, hey, if the other comes through with better proof, I'll jump ship and go to it. You would not.
No, and I think you're fair to make that allowance. If there's evidence, we're talking about evidence consistent. If I see enough evidence consistent with this hypothesis, then at some point I should say that's too reasonable to deny.
Okay, so then right now you're admitting there's a possibility that your God doesn't actually exist.
Let me think about that question, because I want to say from a finite perspective, and because I don't know everything and I can be wrong, I would have to say that I have to allow that possibility. I'd have to say I don't know everything. I could be wrong. I could be delusional. I could be crazy. Correct. I could be imagining this conversation. That's Correct. Also possible. Okay.
Yes, it is.
So from a finite perspective, I think I'd have to say my limited knowledge makes it always possible.
Correct. So at the end of the day, the only reason you choose your idea that God is the answer, and I choose the alternative that it's the Big Bang or whatever, which, I'm not trying to declare what I think at this point because I'm still agnostic. I have no freaking clue. I'm not a scientist even. I'm just pretty convinced it's not a God, but you think it's a God, and you have chosen a God as the answer. And not only a God, but this particular God that you struggle to define because you can only speak about him in negatives instead of any positive terms.
You're missing again the
No, I'm not. And
let me ask you this question.
No, I've given you a lot of time to talk, dude. Give me a chance here, man. And you define and you choose this God, and this is the God of the Bible that I've already explained, expressed in previous episode, is an advocate and an endorser and a lawgiver of how to commit murder, rape, slavery, and pedophilia. And all these things are
what this God does. I mean, you could make those.
It's still my turn to talk. Give me a second, bro. Give me a second to finish my thought. And this is absolutely what the Bible teaches. And this is the God you chose as the God you want to be the creator of this universe.
That's all struggle with that.
No, it's not
because you're not stating it correctly. Partially.
Okay. All right,
maybe at the end of it, if you've heard the whole argument, and you still don't like the foot, but you can't dismiss it because you want to frame it the way you want to frame it. You said the God of the Bible teaches rape and pedophilia. False. No, he doesn't. The Bible doesn't teach pedophilia. Matter of fact, the Bible is a collection of writings that are interpreted by people. I'm not sure what it's supposed to be teaching sometimes. Okay. So you're saying that is your opinion of reading a text that's several thousand years old. It comes from a lot of different places. That's your opinion. Now you could try to make a strong case. Well, this is what I believe. This is what I believe. But I would show why I don't think that's the case. So no, the Bible doesn't teach murder and pedophilia. None of those things are true.
Does it teach slavery? Can we at least go to that one? Because that's pretty clear that God gives.
No, it doesn't teach slavery. No.
Wow.
Matter of fact, Alan, are you a student of history?
Not much.
Okay, then that's probably why you don't know that the institution of slavery existed for thousands of years before the first word of the Bible was ever written.
Well, no, that's not that's William. That's not.
You're saying that it teaches
not
slavery,
the problem.
right?
Like, I may not be a student of history and like in love with it or whatever, but I'm quite aware that slavery existed, and I'm quite aware that it existed in the century that God came in and gave instructions for it. My problem with it is not that it existed. My problem is that the Yahweh of the Bible that knows all things forever and ever, and at one point in history was going to declare that this was an evil thing at any point in history, not only advocated for it and endorsed it, but gave laws on how to properly treat slaves. And you're telling me he didn't do that?
What laws were present about slavery in other countries?
How to beat your slave, as long as he's to a point where he's almost dead, but as long as he doesn't die after 3 days, you're okay. That's an appropriate way to beat a slave.
And you're using the full context of everything that's going on there.
Yes, I am, absolutely.
So the Bible just says, let's go down and beat the hell out of our slaves and kill all of them.
It doesn't matter.
It makes zero sense.
Do you think there's any reason whatsoever that you should have the right to beat some? Really, you think there's any reason whatsoever to beat somebody to a point of death as long as they don't die before 3 days, regardless of what they've done? You think there's a good reason for that?
You don't think there's ever time for people to be punished
to that degree, to beat them to just within 3 days of death?
I'm asking a question. Do you think
torture?
Okay, is punishment okay?
Punishment's okay, but that's called torture. That's different.
Is there ever been a time where people have been beaten and they deserve to be beaten? That was an appropriate punishment?
No.
Never?
No.
Okay, so you just said...
Give me an instance when it's okay to beat somebody.
Okay, you mentioned pedophilia.
Give me an instance where pedophilia is okay. I would love that.
And I'm just asking if you said it's wrong. I think you said that earlier, correct? Yes?
I do think it's wrong, yes.
Okay, and if somebody was found guilty of that, do you think that being beaten would be an appropriate response to that?
Would I love that? Sure, because I hate this person for doing that to children. But I still don't think it's inappropriate to beat them after the fact. If you catch somebody in the act, that's a totally different story because now you're in protective mode. That's not premeditated. But when it comes to premeditation to torture somebody, and what grounds would you have to do that? There are plenty of ways to punish somebody without torture.
Are we torturing people when we put them in prison for the things that they do?
Physical torture?
Yeah, it's torture. I mean, you're using a descriptive term to describe an act.
All right, so you're going to define torture as any sort of punishment whatsoever. Is that your point?
I'm not defining it. Use the term. I'm asking you what you mean by it.
Well, punishment would be consequences. Like if you do this, you're going to be put in jail for X amount of years. Mm-hmm. And you will not be allowed to go out in public and have normal life.
Okay.
That is totally different in my mind than what's that?
Is it torture or not?
I don't think that's torture, no.
Okay, so consequences for actions do not constitute torture, right?
I don't think torture is a correct consequence for action, no.
No. And also, my question is...
Can you give me, just because you're leading these questions, I would like, before we go any further, for you to give me an example of where torture would be a good consequence for actions.
I'm not saying torture. You said torture.
No, because you're pushing me in this line and you're trying to get me to give you a reason where torture is okay. So I'd like you to give me one since you're pressing me.
No, I don't think torture is okay, but you use the descriptive term torture.
I said it wasn't okay, so where's the problem?
Okay, because you're not defining it clearly.
Well, how would you define it?
Torture would be to inflict pain for no reason.
Okay.
Other than maybe pleasure.
Okay.
Okay. But to inflict pain to someone because as a consequence to an act, I'm saying it's not torture. I'm asking you, do you agree with me or not?
On the way you just defined it, I probably would. Where it's as long as it's for pleasure and you're choosing it or whatever, like I can see that.
Okay. So, if
it's
we
not
have
premeditated, what's that?
Okay, so I agree with that. So if somebody's receiving punishment, whether it be harsh punishment or not, as a consequence of an act, that's not torture. That's a consequence of an act. Now, let me ask you this question: does a society?
Wow. So because
I'll wait until we work it out.
God's allowed to, because God's allowed to give torture as a punishment for an act, that makes it okay?
No, I'm asking you. I'm not talking about.
No, that's my point. It doesn't make it okay.
So we should let all the people out of our prison systems because that's torture.
I didn't say that.
You kind of did, though.
If you're torturing them, then yeah, I think that's a real problem, and I think the people who are torturing them should be replaced from people who won't.
The question is,
and again, we're talking about torture that's not also requested, if you will.
Okay.
Right? Because we're talking about pleasure. That's totally different.
Question one, first layer of question is, if you're receiving a punishment, even if it's harsh, as a consequence of an action, is that torture?
What do you define as harsh?
Anything could be. I don't know. I'm just giving that as a qualifier.
Like you would say, if you committed murder and you went to jail for your lifetime, you consider that harsh?
Or maybe like if I stole an apple, they cut my hand off for it. That could be considered harsh.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's harsh.
Okay, I agree. It's a bit harsh, but it's still a consequence for an action. It's not torture.
It is, and I would say that's also a bad consequence. And I would say that if God were to initiate that consequence, I'd have a real problem with him.
Okay. Now let me ask you.
Wouldn't you?
I don't know. Let's think it through.
So if you do have a problem with it, but if God said it was okay, you'd be okay with it.
I like to reason my way to conclusions. And usually when we jump to them, we've made mistakes along the way. So let's go to the second question I had was, is it wrong for a society to inflict punishment for bad behavior?
No.
Okay. So you agree that if we're given consequences for bad behavior, that's not torture, and a society should be able to inflict consequences for bad behavior. Yes. Now, was the law of Moses a law to govern a society?
It was.
Okay. So those three affirmations would make your accusation incorrect.
No.
You may disagree with
time out. Big problem there.
Okay.
One is, in any society outside of Israel, people supposedly do the best they can to come up with systems that are going to work for justice. Sometimes we're going to screw up and we're going to make bad decisions. Your God is the God of Israel, and the law of Moses was granted by God, and they're following his rule. They shouldn't make those mistakes. And if they're giving justice based on torture and horrible rape and things that they shouldn't be doing because they made a mistake, that's God's fault. That's where I have a problem.
Okay, so you're reading the Old Testament through a very specific lens, aren't you?
Yes, because it's God's. Yeah, I'm reading it through the lens that God instructed Israel on how to do the laws that they were supposed to follow.
Okay. So I'll give you a bit of context here, let you reflect on that. So what we believe about the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, are some of them were instructions about the tabernacle and the cult of the Yahweh cult, how to worship, etc. Some of this was what we would. It's very similar to English case law. If you're not familiar with that, what they would do is they pass laws as the judges would enact sentences in Western Europe. Those judgments were recorded, and future judges would appeal back to case law. It's still part of our legal system today. And they would say, this is how this judgment was rendered. A lot of these type of things in the law of Moses were judgments in civil actions. People came to either Moses or the civil magistrates of the time, and they presented issues. Things like my neighbor's cow broke into my pasture and destroyed all my crops, so I killed my neighbor's cow. Now, in older times and without civil law, that could have turned into bloodshed. I could go kill my neighbor. You killed my cow. They went to the judge, and the judge said, "This is what you do. You pay him for this. You do this, and this is the law." And it's written as case law. That's how that's accumulated. So when you read a statement that says, somebody brought somebody before the magistrates, possibly Moses, possibly one of the magistrates, and said, this man caught his slave doing whatever, XYZ, and he beat him nearly to death. What should be done about that? And the judge made a judgment on it, and that became a part of the foundation of their law. And you can say, well, that was unjust and it was evil and terrible. Well, the reality is, a lot of the life was harsh back then, and the realities around them were typically many times harsher, and we don't really know all the circumstances. The slave could have been, I don't know, killing people. I don't know what he could have been robbing, stealing. He could have been. We don't know what he did. We just know that was the prescription there. Now that's the way I'm looking at these things in the Old Testament. You're looking at them as though God sat down and wrote this out and said this.
No, not even that, dude. I'm looking at it like, yeah,
people believe that
happened. Sometimes it happened, but I'm also reading it the way you're saying, and like that may have happened, but where was God, who apparently at that time was talking to people verbally, couldn't literally come down and say, don't think that's such a good idea. We're not going to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. He couldn't seem to do that, apparently. And when it came to raiding nations, he apparently had no problem saying, take the young girls that don't have husbands, kill the rest, kill the men and the women and the boys. We have no use for the boys. We only have use for these young girls which, by the way, are at the young age of marriage, like that 12 to 14-year-old age, according to the way tradition, records it. Take those, bring them in, do your thing with them, figure out if you like them or not. Because if you don't, you can get rid of them. Bro, that's called rape. And it's pedophilia because it's underage girls. And that's the way God instructed them to take care of these girls from these nations. Even if somebody wants to come in and try to make the argument, well, that was Moses. He kind of strayed from God. God and Moses had this thing, dude. They talked. God could have come to him at any time and said, yeah, that's not going to happen. In fact, maybe that would have been a good time to kill Moses instead of when he hit a rock instead of talking to it. Because, that's so much worse than rape and pedophilia.
Well, sure.
I have problems with this, man.
Yeah, you have. And it's because, and to be honest with you, it's because you and this is the way you were taught to read that is a very, what we call fundamentalist and a very wooden literal type of approach to that. That's not how those texts were even read. Maybe 1,000 years before the time of Christ. They were read allegorically. They were, if you read.
You said that was read allegorically?
Yes.
You're saying Israel didn't actually conquer any of these nations.
No, I'm saying the stories were preserved and the ideas they were passed along, and they were part of their identity. And as time went on, these texts were continued to be used, but they were not. But again, even several centuries, maybe 1,000 years or more before the time of Christ, people weren't reading these texts as that God wants us to go kill our neighbors. They were reading them allegorically. They were reading them mystically, and they weren't reading them in the sort of wooden literal way that you're reading them. I think I don't think it's necessary for us to take that approach. My opinion of, like, say, the stories of the kings of the conquest, I think they have a historical bone structure. Now, I started to say they're historical, but I want to qualify that the way Semitic peoples wrote history is not the same way the Greeks and the way we do even today. So they would flourish stories. They would idealize them a bit. but I believe the general idea of some of these stories were things that really happened. And I know the popular way to read that is to say, well, that God came down and said, do this, do this. What happened was you had somebody who's writing a story and they're reflecting on it, and they're saying, we did this, this happened, this was the consequences. And then it is their statement that God said to do this. It's their statement that God wanted us to act this way. And this is a sort of a compilation of thoughts and thinking and experience over thousands of years. And that's why it's a mistake to go right back to it and try to read it without the context of the tradition itself. And I know that's a very Protestant thing to do, but it's a really problematic thing to do. I can show you very easily that the apostles in the New Testament were not reading the Old Testament that way. I can give one example right off the top of my head is where Paul talks about from the prophets. He said, with stammering lips and another tongue will I speak to this people. If you read what he's talking about there, the Old Testament passage is not talking about anything he's talking about. He's reading it very allegorically. He's given it a mystical, the Psalms are read that way. It's just the problem with people in the Old Testament, the problem with people in Scripture altogether is they are not reading it with the way, in the understanding, in the way of the people who passed them along read them. And the tradition and the culture and the context is missing. And so we jump right in the middle of it. And it's like, well, God said to kill all these people.
So
that's
you're
not
reading,
how the texts were used.
So the stammering lips example, all right, and the Psalms example, just to pause, because I'm trying to understand this, because once again, I feel like it's like trying to catch a fish here. Let's go to the Old Testament, and if I say, hey, this passage is, well, we have a different interpretation of that.
Sure, we do.
Well, we think differently. It's almost like, if you trap my God, I've got a way out. I'll just make up something. And that's basically what this seems to be happening. It's just, well, we just have any reason whatsoever to just escape the problem.
Except we've been reading it this way for thousands of years before anybody came along with these problems.
When you say reading it this way means it changes whenever it's convenient. That's what reading it this way means. Because there's no consistency to your argument, dude. It's like it's if it fits what you're.
It is consistent. It is consistent, and it's historically verifiable, and it's not changing all the time. It's a consistent reading.
I seriously disagree with that. I bet you if we pulled up 16 Eastern Orthodox commentaries on any one of these passages, I can almost promise you we'll have at least 12 different interpretations, dude.
Go ahead and try.
Maybe we'll do that, because I can guarantee you that is not going to happen. This is the same thing I see in Protestantism. It's all over the place because nobody can agree on any of these texts. And part of the problem is none of us live there. So I get it. You have the same rebuttal to me, and I can't defend that. I can't say, oh, well, William, you're wrong because I'm right. I don't know. We have no way of knowing for sure how any of these texts were actually read.
We know how, because we have been doing it for thousands of years.
All right, you guys are the right religion. I forgot.
Well, we have, and that's not a joke, and it's not a claim that can't be vindicated. We can show from the first century AD until to the present, we have been the same faith, and we have had the same beliefs, and we've read the things the same way. Now, if people want to come home along in the 1500s or whenever and come up with their own religion based on our text, that's up to them. But this is the way we've read them, and this is the way we've always read them. And it really, to be honest with you, it's not fully fair to us to have to answer for ideas and things that people come up with that didn't come from us. They got the text from us, but their understanding doesn't come from us. So that's not our problem. And I'll give you an example maybe that will help. If you've ever studied the Hindu text, the Gitas, and they're often stories very much like that. Krishna going out, and killing these people and having this war. And the Hindus don't read them historical any more than we read the Old Testament. They see them as spiritual works. They're spiritual writings. Are they some historical parts to it? Certainly. But the bigger part of it is, what does it mean to them spiritually? What do they think it means? And we would never go to the Hindus and say, you know what, you guys believe that this is that. No, we'd say, well, that's your tradition. That's how you approach it. And I think that's the only fair way to approach how we approach these texts.
And I can appreciate that actually more than you imagine, because what you just expressed is right up my alley. You would also go to them and you would say, that's very nice, but that is not the true God. Your God doesn't exist. Which I would say the same thing to you. That's very nice. You have your own belief, but there's no God there. There's not a real God. And you would have no reason to say, yes, but we do have one. No, you don't. You literally would say, you have to say, well, you're right. We're not 100% sure. We just choose this because this is as far back as we can tell, it's the most historical interpretation and reading of this text. And we like this text. So
I wouldn't say
you really don't have anything more to solidify it than that.
I wouldn't say to a Hindu, you don't know God, or you don't know anything about God, or
so they can be right too. Then, so their God is true too.
Well, here's an analogy that will answer that question. And I think I've used this before. The ancients, they viewed the cosmos as, many of them as, some of them as a piece of land on the back of a tortoise, and I think that tortoise maybe standing on an elephant, something like that. The Greeks were more sophisticated, and they saw the world as more like a dinner plate floating in the ocean. But they saw that there was stars orbiting, and they could track the stars, and they were a bit more scientific in their knowledge, but they were still incorrect. And then today we think we're much more correct. We probably are, but then 100 years from now, somebody may find something that changes even that. The point being is, just because we have different perspectives of the same universe, and even though some are worse and some are better, doesn't mean we're all describing a different universe, and doesn't make the universe itself false. And this is what we mean by the diversity of religion. Doesn't disprove the general idea. I don't think the Hindu concept of God is accurate for several reasons, but I certainly don't think it follows the path of the Christian faith, which is the path that I'm on. And so I wouldn't say to a Hindu, you don't know anything, or that what you do has no value, or that you're lost and you have nothing and I know everything. And I wouldn't say that they may be somebody that's a Hindu that certainly lives a better life than I do. And I'm not even going to say that they're going to go to hell forever because they don't know what I know. I may go to hell forever, who knows? But I don't know that about. That's not the way our faith approaches that. So I don't think that's the case. I don't think that every religion is just abjectly false except for mine. I believe in mine for the reasons I believe in it, but I believe other people's expression of religion do have value. And the early Christians didn't say that. They didn't say, well, everybody else is false but us. They didn't say that at all. They actually said they tried to build on the ideas that people already had, and believed that in many ways what they were bringing was a fulfillment to what people had looked for religiously. And there was some kind of vindication to that, because they were extremely successful in turning multitudes of people all over the place to follow the Christian faith. So generally, that kind of leads us into the top. And so what I would say is, and here's the thing that I can't get anybody to see. It's very difficult because the Protestants are so locked into them having the 100% truth, and the atheists don't see anything. My contention there is if everybody is seeing something. Let me give you an analogy. I love analogies. I don't know if you picked up on that by now. But if we're all out in the parking lot tonight, and we're just shooting the breeze and talking, and something runs through the woods behind us, and I look and I say, man, that looks just like a black bear. I think that was a black bear. And you look at it, no, dude, that was clearly somebody's dog. And then somebody else says, I don't know what you guys are talking. That was just the wind blowing. We might all say that all three of our answers are contradictory and incompatible. But the fact that we're all looking and saying that we saw something is indicating that something happened. And I think that's what's missed by religions. I mean, all the peoples of all the families of all the world, as far back as we can know, have been saying this same kind of thing. There's something about this universe. There's something about existence. There's something out there. There's people report miracles, and I know should have some level of skepticism about, we shouldn't just accept everything, but there are literally works that talk about, from a very academic point of view, of people reporting phenomenon. Like miraculous phenomena. It's so widely done that you have to stop and think something must be going on. If everybody's seeing something, maybe they're not all accurate, and maybe their descriptions don't always match up, but somebody saw something. And that's kind of where I'm at with that chapter.
All right. So I guess and everybody just start rearing up your questions because we're about that time. You guys are just dropping them from this show. So do that. I'll be going through those here in a couple minutes. So I guess I have 3 quick things to say in regards to everything you said. Number one, as regards to your analogy, can all the religious diversity, they all have maybe some right to them. You're saying I would go the exact opposite. All religions are wrong. So that's where I would land there.
The more risky claim, by the way.
Although I gotta say, one of the things I do want to return to with you, because it's how we started the show, because it is an important idea to me. I really do want to respect the concept because we started out this way. It is discussing whether or not we can have some semblance of religion without a God in it. Because I expressed that at the beginning. Is God necessary for religion? So we can talk about that further and see if that's a possibility. Not tonight, obviously, but I'd like to broach that because, maybe the idea of religion can be redeemed if there isn't a God a part of it. Because, in my opinion, God is the reason religion becomes evil. So eliminate God because he's always in any theonomy whatsoever. They always seem to be the thumb down on the people type gods. They're even our God or religion's Christianity's God, even your version. We can't talk about it all tonight. That's just my opinion. That's the way I see it. So anyway, so yes, religion without a God. Love to talk about that at some point a little bit further with you because that was an interesting discussion we started out this whole series with. So that's my first thing. Second thing was, see if I can remember what it was. It was related to that. Diversity. I don't know. I'll come back to it if I can think of it because I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. The third one was, does religious diversity disprove God? That was what this chapter was about. And supposedly atheists argue that way. I think that's a weird argument. I don't see how you can do that. That's why I kind of waited to the end here because I don't really see much to talk about regarding this chapter because I don't think religious diversity disproves God. I don't see how it can. That would be like saying different street signs prove that left turns don't exist or something like that. Like
right.
it just
Right.
that's silly. You can't disprove something just because there's a whole bunch of different views of it. I think God in itself is not provable to begin with, which is why I'm an atheist. But no, I don't think religious diversity disproves God. Clearly, you guys have so many views. Even talking to you, I can't. I'm just like, I have you, I have Rick, I have Brian Simmons. Like between just the 3 of you that I'm talking to, I'm like, I'm literally talking to 3 different gods. Like it's just mind blowing. You guys have vast opinions of who this God is, and I'm like, what do I don't even know how to discuss Christianity. Like, why don't you guys just start new religions for crying out loud and just like make your own God so that we can actually define it differently? Because you're all calling yourselves Christians, and I know you're. So anyway, I don't know. That's my frustration at this point. Is just I don't even know how to have this dialogue because everybody has different definitions of God. So so that was that, and then I wish I could remember the other point I was going to make. It was related to that the diversity thing, but anyway, it's gone. So if I think of it, I'll come back to it. So let's broach some of these questions. Unless, did you want to say anything else? Because I did just say stuff. So I want to give you a chance to respond to that if you want to.
I could say I could be the one that's wrong, and that's one of the reasons I'm trying to be more general with my statements. I'm trying not to lock into specific, more mystical, theological, and try to stay more philosophical in what I'm talking about, because I could be wrong. And I want to zoom out. I want to see a bigger picture. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to see the whole phenomena of what we're looking at and what we're experiencing. And so it would be interesting to talk to some of these guys about what they see. And it would be interesting, to be honest with you. I think sometime it might be fun for me and you to get a fundamentalist 6,000-year-old Earth young creationist and talk, because it might be funny to see how we would who would agree with what, when, and where. We might, it'd be like a Royal Rumble, everybody's elbowing everybody, But
well, maybe, I don't know for certain, but because Don's not a CC'er, I'm guessing Don Preston's probably a young earther. I don't know for certain, but I would maybe imagine. I don't know, but I can't speak for him. But
sure.
At any rate, it would be fun to have you, him, and me and Josh Bowen talk slavery. That came up tonight, and
Sure.
we've asked Don. I'm hoping maybe you can get him on, because Jude, that would be a dope discussion.
Yeah, it
You,
would be
me,
epic.
Don Preston, and Joshua Bowen discussing biblical slavery.
Sure.
We got to go there, man. That would be so fun. Why don't you work on him a little bit for that? Because I think that would be a great discussion.
Yeah.
Speaking of slavery, Tim Johnson asked a while ago, it's way back when, which I'm guessing, I don't know for sure. I think he's asking you this. The way that you were defining God, is that the God who gives instructions for slavery? But I think you kind of answered that, and you would say no. Right?
Yeah, I don't. Let me be succinct in my opinion here, and maybe I should do that more often. My opinion is that what we are reading is not God saying slavery is okay, this is how you do it. This is laws governing things that are already existing. Slavery already existed. So that's how I see that. I think eventually we see that institution go away. So I don't think God is endorsing or teaching or saying this is an ideal. Maybe you don't like the fact that that's the way it was approached, but I don't think that's what's happening there.
All right. By the way, those of you, Tim and Homemaker Calling Lily, thank you guys for helping us out with the internet connection. I still feel like near the end here, we started to go in and out. I got to figure out what's going on my end. We apologize for that. I know that's really makes for a horrible show, and I deeply apologize for any connection issues. But thanks for sticking around. We appreciate that. Tim mentioned again also later, he said there is enough inconsistencies in the Bible to prove that God doesn't exist. I would obviously agree with that, but I want you to have a chance to respond to that, William. I mean, obviously you don't agree with that, or maybe you do. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I would go ahead and say there are things in the Bible that are not consistent. There are parts of the gospel accounts that don't perfectly align. There are some things like that. But I think, again, if these are texts that are taught within the context of a community, and you have to take into account, I think, how that community reads and understands those texts. So no, I don't think you disprove because God could exist and the Bible be a ball of trash. Okay, so the Bible having inconsistency doesn't prove God doesn't exist. It will just prove the Bible wasn't a good way to understand that God. Okay,
well, that's a good point.
Yeah,
you're right. Yeah. Just like having different beliefs doesn't prove God doesn't exist. I mean, yeah, we're on the same page there. I mean, this isn't about trying to disprove God exists. How can you do that? It's like trying to disprove unicorns exist. It would be a wasteful show if we were doing that. I need evidence that he does exist, and that's what we've been working on. The Bible is not helping your case, just saying. Anyway, Heather McShay, what's up, my friends? Thank you so much for joining again. Love you, kiddo. So glad you're joining in with us. Homemaker Calling, let's see. I don't think she has anything else. She does have this one comment, which I thought was cool when I made the comment about Moses, getting killed for striking a rock as opposed to, giving instructions on, or not stopping people from raping or whatever, or Yahweh hunting Moses down to kill him because he didn't mutilate his son on the 8th day. Also a great point.
Can I ask you a question here, though?
Yeah.
I do get the hunting, but the word mutilate there, you do realize that you realize that 99% of children are circumcised in hospitals today as routine. I think that's inappropriate to call that mutilation.
Well,
I
I mean,
can understand you having a problem with the fact that God wanted to kill Moses. I get that part, but to call that mutilation, I think that's a bit unfair when that's a valid medical procedure even today.
I mean, but you got to admit the medical procedure today is a lot different than using a flint rock and chopping the foreskin off, bro.
Who said they did that? That's an assumption. Jews don't do that today.
There's an actual text that demonstrates it. Where, if I'm not mistaken, it was either during David's time or Moses' time. I don't recall exactly off the top of my head, but these were men, and that's it was one of the battles where David's laying there from one and they all busted off their thing. Yeah, it's exactly what it says.
What it was, it's kind of a weird but cool story. So they go by this town, and the men of the town basically rape one of the patriarch's sister. So they call the guys out and say, well, here's what we're going to do to solve this. Every one of you guys get circumcised and you'll be a part of our family. So they get circumcised, everybody's sore, and then they kill all of them. So it's kind of like it's like a really kind of an underhanded move, but yes, it's kind of a
yeah, it's a story. But I mean, it does actually kind of give you an indication of how they did it, though, you know. So
I think it was surgical. I think I get the general idea that's a difficult story, but I don't think saying circumcision is mutilation is fair. I think that part's unfair. Just one minor point there.
That's all right.
I'll concede the whole thing. The whole thing's difficult, but
that's okay. I can roll with you on that. That's cool, man. I'm not gonna press that issue. You're probably right. It's fine. No worries. That's the least of the issues tonight. we have more to discuss than whether or not circumcision is mutilation. Anyway, so next week, because I mean, we literally didn't even have to talk about chapter 7, religious diversity disproves God, because I already admitted that doesn't do it. I think we've spent plenty of time on there's no evidence for God, but you know, that's kind of such a central topic. If we come back to that, we come back to it. I'm not worried about that. But next week, myth number 8. The Bible has been proven false. Okay, so supposedly that is a atheist claim that the Bible has been proven false. And I guess the idea, William, if I'm not mistaken, is that if the Bible has been proven false, therefore God doesn't exist, I guess.
But I think we kind of heard that argument tonight a bit.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we may even have to broach that, because I already admitted that doesn't prove God doesn't exist either. So here I am, you're talking to an atheist. I don't use that argument. I do think the Bible's false. I think it's a myth. And therefore, it demonstrates that the God that's in that Bible isn't true. But it doesn't necessarily mean that a God outside of that particular Bible isn't true. But, you know, if you're going to ask me, does the Bible itself, is that the source of the God that exists? I would have to say definitely no, because that Bible is 100% myth. So if that's what let me ask you this. Is the point of this chapter to prove that the God of the Bible is the true God? Because if that's your point, now we have a conversation. But if your point is simply that there could be a God, even though this particular Bible God is proven false, I can't say that that's the case as an atheist.
Not generally, the chapter is going to show that people who say that are taking way too novice approach to a text that is 6,000 years old, filled with poetry, prophecy, all kind of, and they're just jumping. To say the Bible's been proven false shows me you know jack about the Bible or text or literature or anything, to be honest with you. So, you know, it's a literary work. It'd be like me saying I prove Walt Whitman false. It'd be the same. It's an ignorant. It's a bad approach. So it means you don't understand what you're looking at. And I think that's what I would like to.
I mean, I think there's plenty of evidence to demonstrate that all non-Christian historical scholarship demonstrates that at least the New Testament was written, approximately a century after all of the Bible was supposedly written, and then most of the Old Testament was written during the Babylonian captivity, which invalidates all the prophecies as actually being prophecies. So I'd say that's pretty solid evidence that the Bible was false, but okay.
Yeah, but that's not historical either. So we probably should go into that. You're repeating things that are not historical, accepted historical theories. That's not what we actually see. Some of it maybe. Some of it's not going to land. The works of Paul, for instance, are pretty much considered to be absolutely 100% authentic by even the hardest skeptics. So, some of the Gospels.
Well, sure. I mean, it's likely Paul started the cult. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, and I agree with you about the Old Testament being, some of it being written. My theory is most of the stories, or a lot of the stories, were older. They were written down probably during that time, and they were compilations. And that's the reason it's more important to understand the context of the people that compiled it, or at least as important to understand the people that compiled it as the text themselves, because there was a reason why they chose those texts and those stories to pass forward. I think we should know that before we could critique the whole book.
All right, fair enough. So next week, then, the goal is to demonstrate that the God of the Bible, just to make sure we're clear again, the God of the Bible is the true God. Is that the argument?
No, the argument, what is put forth, and again, somebody tried to do that tonight. The statement was there's enough errors in the Bible to prove that God doesn't exist. That was a statement of somebody on this one tonight.
Sure.
So the argument from atheists, and somebody tried it tonight, was there's errors in the Bible, therefore it proves God doesn't exist. And my argument is that's false. First of all,
it proves a God doesn't exist. I'm asking you, is your goal to demonstrate that the God of the Bible exists?
Well, yeah, that's my goal all the time. Every one of these episodes has been that.
So essentially, if that is the true God, and let's just say hypothetically we demonstrate that the Bible actually does have errors and is false and has been written in a context that doesn't actually have any predictive prophecy or whatever, are you going to say, well, yeah, but there is a God anyway? Or are you going to concede that, wow, I guess God doesn't exist after all?
I guess what I would hope, and I've been hoping, is people would listen to what I'm actually saying and follow the rationality. There's an argument being laid out. There's a thought process. There's an approach. And I feel like sometimes I make these points and then we circle back around to the preconceived assumptions about them. I'm making a specific kind of argument and I'm approaching it in a specific kind of way. At the end of my process, if you don't agree with me, you don't have to, but you should at least fully understand what my process is. I'm not going to jump to a conclusion, and I'm not going to just jump out swinging with these cliche debate stuff. I'm going to rationally lay out a thought process. First of all, what is the evidence? What do we know for certain? What can we speculate with safety? And then what conclusions should we draw? I think that's a rational approach, and that's what I'm doing every one of these chapters. I'm following that process. What's the truth? What's not the truth? So let's establish the data. Okay. What safe speculations can be made? And then what conclusions could be drawn from those speculations and the data? I think that's how you have to live life. Okay. So you don't have to agree with me, but respect the process, and you at least will know what one dude, weird looking dude on the internet, thinks about religion.
All right. So, I mean, as far as tonight's concerned, then, like, to try to follow that pattern, the one truth that we can all both agree on is that religious diversity does not disprove God. Can we?
I agree with that. Yes, that's an agreed upon.
I'm okay with that. Also, that even if the Bible ends up being false, does not disprove a God of some sort.
Yes. And let me say this, and I don't want to drag this out, but if you miss this, you're going to miss everything I'm saying. If you don't start from just perceptual, deductive reasoning and coming without the Bible, without religion, without the claims of religion external to that, if you don't start with the idea that God is the most probable reality, then the rest of this stuff is going to be irrelevant. It doesn't matter what the Bible says at that point. It doesn't matter which religion may or may not. Who cares what they believe? Okay. So you got to start by establishing that first point. Is it even probable? Is there even a probability that a God exists? If you can't answer that with a yes, then the rest of these conversations make no sense. But if I answer that question for myself and say, yes, I do think that's the case, then it sets me up for the follow-up question. Well, then what should I do with that information? That leads me to which religion maybe gives me insight, or maybe none of them do. Okay. That's a fair, but this is the process. We start with one thing. If that's the case, then what about the next question? Then that's the case. And then to me, the Bible question only matters if you've determined in your mind that the Christian faith is the best way to express God. Otherwise, who cares what the Bible says? Who cares what the latest Southern Living magazine says? I don't care. It only matters if it's a source of information for a particular context. And I think that's what I'd like for people to see about the Bible. It's bad form to go to the Bible and start pulling up what you think are contradictions because you don't even know how to read it. It's not your religion. Why would you even do that?
Well, it used to be my religion.
Fried chicken. You don't.
Used to be my religion.
Well, it used to be, yes.
But yeah, I still have some familiarity with it, though I've tried to disconnect myself. But here I am, still getting sucked back into it. Hey, Heather McShay shared a long comment, and since I can't read it and concentrate on what you're saying, I'm just going to post it up because I don't know if it's a question or what. Slavery. I get that the rules of Christianity are to follow the law of the land, and indentured servitude still exists, but there is a separate rule for indentured servitude. To give rules of physical abuse to the brink of death is very manlike. They imprisoned people all the time. Why the slave? Clearly, they were not equal in God's eyes. Fair enough. I like that, but what do you want to say about that? Do you agree with that, or you have a problem with that?
I think some of the things I can agree with the general perspective. I think the problem we have here is we're trying to make a judgment on Middle Eastern, ancient Near East culture based on modern standards with very little context of what's really going on there. It's easy to make assumptions and jump to conclusions. And let's say God doesn't exist, okay? Just for sake of argument, why the hell did anybody keep all these documents if God doesn't exist? Why would they keep things that are this difficult? People kept these because they felt like they were beneficial to them. So assuming that they're the most evil, poisonous things ever doesn't even make sense, even if you're just a skeptic materialist. There has to be some value to them or people wouldn't have kept them. So I think this dismissive attitude is just a bit too shallow.
I mean, that's almost like saying, why do they keep selling cigarettes when they have the labels on the cigarette cartons that say they're so horrible for you? Why do they keep the labels on there if they're going to keep having cigarettes? I just don't think that's a solid argument, but that's okay.
Well, more like, why do they put the label on there anyway?
Well, I mean, because they have to by law.
Yeah. Again, it's too.
But why would they keep selling something that they think is absolutely horrible? I mean, I don't think that's. But anyway, it was fun nonetheless. And next week we'll broach into the Bible because obviously that's where we're going next. This will be it's going to be a fun discussion. Holy crap. I almost feel like we need to bring in an army of people to have this conversation, but we'll just do it ourselves. And then I'm sure we will have a slew of comments and questions next week. It'll be a lot of fun. Everybody keep in mind this Friday, I release 2 shows that I'm doing. Answers from Genesis releases at 10 a.m. We're working through the How to Kill God the Easy Way book. So make sure you tune in to Answers from Genesis. It's an awesome show. Jen and I have a great time. There's so much more content than even in the book. 5:00 p.m. on Friday, Dustin Curley and I release our next Birds of a Feather episode. Lately, we've been on a covenant creation kick. It's been a lot of fun. Can't remember what this Friday is. I think it's more on that and a few other things. So join in for that. That's Birds of a Feather on YouTube. And then on the Unraveler show this Sunday, Rick Welch and I continue with round 3 of the Welch versus Bondar, Bondar versus Welch debate. It's been fun. You all have a great night. William, thanks for joining me. You're an awesome dude. We will see you again soon. Everybody have a great night.